going to be talking about the topography of the Har HaBayis, of the Temple Mount, and the building of the temple itself. And then again, a lesson that we can practically learn in our own personal service of Hashem. So the Rambam explains that Har HaBayis was not a nice level field. That the site on which the Beis HaMikdash was built was in fact a har, it was a mountain. And the mountain was not leveled off to be completely flat. And instead, the Beis HaMikdash itself was built up the slope of the mountain itself. So to explain these halachas, I'm going to bring up a slide which depicts the topography that we're going to be speaking about. You can have a look on the screen online. So what you could see is as follows. This is a cross-section, as it were, of the Beis HaMikdash from the side. And what would happen is a person would come up onto Har HaBayis, and the light blue, the aqua color, that is a gate. And then there would be a series of stairs, and those stairs would then lead up through another gate into the Ezras Nashim. The Ezras Nashim was an area which was built in front of the main Azara where the sacrifices would take place. From there, one would ascend another series of stairs through the gate, the Shar HaNikanor, the eastern gate of the Azara, and then an additional series of stairs before one could enter into the Eichel, the Beis HaMikdash itself. So you could actually see that the Beis HaMikdash, whilst this is not exactly to scale, but as you would enter, you would be constantly rising up higher and higher and higher as you progressed further within the temple compound, eventually reaching the end. So by way of introduction, the Mishnah tells us that each of the gates of the temple, and those are the gates of the Har HaBayis of the Temple Mount and the gates of the temple itself, were 20 amos tall. So approximately 10 meters tall were the height of each of the gates. Now the easternmost gate, as a person would come up from the east, entering the Beis HaMikdash from the east, entering Har HaBayis, he would enter the eastern gate, which is referred to as Shar Shushan. Now, Shar Shushan, the eastern gate, as we said before, was 20 amos tall, and a person would then enter from the east, and they would traverse the space of the Har HaBayis, which is much bigger than I've depicted it over here, and they would then ascend to the Ezras Nashim through a series of 12 stairs. Now, these 12 stairs would go up. Each of these stairs rose up by 1/2 of an amma. Each stair would be a rise of half an amma and then a cross step of half an amma. So therefore, these 12 stairs totaled to a height of 6 amos. So each of the 12 stairs being half an amma tall. And when a person would then climb up those stairs and enter the Ezras Nashim through the gate, they would now be standing 6 amos, or approximately 3 meters higher than they were on the ground level of the Har HaBayis. Then they would traverse the entirety of the Ezras Nashim and come to the next series of stairs. These next series of stairs, there were 15 stairs. And again, each of these 15 stairs rose up half an amma and extended for half an amma. And that brought you to the Shar HaNikanor. The Nikanor gates are, of course, the miraculous gates which were carved and formed in Egypt. They were procured, they were bought by a Jew by the name of Nikanor, who wanted to buy special copper gates for the Beis HaMikdash. And when he was transporting them from Mitzrayim, from Egypt by sea, we know the story that there was a storm. They had to cast off one of the gates into the water. And when they wanted to cast off the second, he said, if you're going to throw that gate in, then you throw me in as well. And therefore, they were successful in the storm stop. They were successful in bringing the one gate back to the Beis HaMikdash. But miraculously, the second gate, which had been thrown into the water, floated alongside, and they were able to bring that as well. So a person would then come to the Shar Nikanor, having climbed 15 stairs, and now at this point, they would be standing 13.5 amas above the ground of the Har HaBayis, having climbed the 12 stairs of 6 amas height to the Ezras Nashim, and the additional 15 stairs, each one being half an amma, so a total of 7.5 ammas, which would lead them into the Azara, the main courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash, where the sacrifices were brought. And therefore, the 6 plus the 7.5, one would be standing 13.5 ammas above the floor of the Har HaBayis. Then the halacha, according to the Rambam, follows the view of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, And Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says that in the Azara there was the Duchan. The Duchan was where the Leviim would stand when they would sing their shira, when they would sing their song at the time the carbon was being brought. It is also where the Kohanim would stand to bless the people, which is why we call Birchas Kohanim Duchanim, because the Kohanim would stand on the Duchan. And the Duchan was a series of 3 stairs. Now, these 3 stairs of the Duchan were in such a way that the first step was 1 full amma, and then the additional 3 stairs which were above that were a half an amma each. So therefore, based on that, one would come to the next level, the Azara, and be standing 16 ammas above the ground level of Har Bayis, because they were already 13 and a half ammas above, plus the 1 amma step, plus 3 half amma steps, totaling 16 ammas above the ground level. Then we come to the next and final series of stairs. The next and final series of stairs were the stairs which led directly to the Heichal, to the structure to enter into the Kodesh. And here there were 15 stairs, and additional 12 stairs. And these 12 stairs, which led up to the Heichal, again, each one of them rose up half an amma, but this time their plateau was 1 full amma. But the 12 stairs, each rising up half an amma, totals another 6. And that would lead you to the Pesach HaUlam, the big opening of the antechamber to the Beis HaMikdash, which was in fact 40 ammas tall, not 20 ammas like the other gates. So that's approximately 20 meters tall. And then there was the gate that led into the doorway leading into the Kodesh itself, which the Shar HaGadol, the great gate, which was 20 ammas tall as well. So when a person climbed these 12 additional stairs, they were now standing 22 ammas above the level of Har HaBayis where they started. So the 12 steps from Har HaBayis to the Ezras Nashim rises up 6 ammas. The 15 steps to the Azara rises up an additional 7.5 ammas. Then you have the steps of the Duchan rises up in another 2.5 ammas, and that is followed by another 6 ammas from the stairs from the Azara to the Heichel, and that gives us the total of 22. Now, why does the Rambam bring this halacha? So the Mishnah tells us that all of the walls that surrounded Har HaBayis and all of the walls of the Beis HaMikdash were very, very tall walls, with the exception of one, with the exception of the wall on the east. That the wall on the east was built lower than all of the others. And the reason is as follows. There is a mitzvah of the Parah Adumah. The mitzvah of the Parah Adumah, of course, the ashes of the Parah Adumah is what brings purity. If a Jew was tamei, became impure with contact to the dead, so they had to be sprinkled with the ashes of the Parah Adumah, the red heifer, which was burned. But the red heifer was not burned in the Beis HaMikdash itself. Instead, it had to be burned outside of the camp, which meant outside of Yerushalayim, and it was done in the times of the Beis HaMikdash on Har HaMishcha or Har HaZeisim. Har HaMishcha, which stood to the east of the Temple Mount of Har HaBayis, that is where the Kohen would shecht the Parah Adumah. That is where it would be burned. Now, in the parasha of the Parah Adumah, it says that the Kohen had to take the blood of the Parah Adumah, the hiza, and he would sprinkle it towards the opening, the doorway of the Oyel Moed of the tabernacle, which we learn from this, that the Kohen, whilst he was standing outside of the camp, had to be able to see, have a direct, unobscured view all the way from Har HaMishcha, Har HaZeisim, all the way through into the Pesach, to the Pnei Oyel Moed, the opening of the Beis HaMikdash itself. And therefore, if we look at this diagram, so you have a look. If the Kohen would be looking through the gate, because the walls are very tall, he would look through the gate of Har HaBayis, the 20 amma tall gate at the opening of the Temple Mount. He would then be able to gaze through the next gate, the next doorway, into the Ezras Nashim, into the Azara. However, as you could see, that the gaze of the Kohen would end up facing directly towards the stairs that led up to the Heichal. And therefore, by looking through the gate of Har HaBayis, the eastern gate, the Kohen would not be able to see into the doorway of the Beis HaMikdash itself. And therefore, for that reason, the Rambam explains, that is why the eastern wall of Har HaBayis was built lower than the others, so that the Kohen, when he would bring the Parah Adumah on Har HaMishcha would be able to gaze over that wall of Har HaBayis and then be able to look through the subsequent gates and have a direct view all the way into the Heichal, all the way into the Beis HaMikdash itself. So what's fascinating is as follows. We know the Rambam tells us in the laws of the Parah Adumah that there are 10 Parah Adumahs that will be brought. One was brought in the times of Moshe Rabbeinu. Between Moshe Rabbeinu and present, an additional 8 Parah Adumahs have been brought, and the 10th and final Parah Adumah will be brought in the times of Mashiach, B'mheira B'yameinu, which will happen very, very soon. Now, because of this Parah Adumah, which was such a rare occurrence, it was not part of the normal avoid in the Beis HaMikdash at all. It was very rare. It might have happened once every couple of decades, or once maybe even every century, or from the times of Moshe Rabbeinu, it happened only once in a number of centuries. And nonetheless, this mitzvah is so important that for that reason, they lowered the eastern wall of Har HaBayis, just so that this mitzvah could be fulfilled properly, that the Kohen who would bring the Parah Adumah outside on Har HaZeisim would be able to have a direct view all the way through into the Kodesh, into the Holy of Holies. So that is the halacha as described by the Rambam. Now I'd like to perhaps suggest the following lesson. What is the idea of tumas meis, impurity from coming in contact with the dead? There is the idea of spiritual death as well. The pasuk says, "Va'atem hadveikim b'Hashem Elokechem chayim kulchem hayom," that you who cleave to Hashem are alive this day. The connection to Hashem, who is Elokim Chayim, who is the God of life, and connection to Torah, which is Torah's Chayim, the Torah of life, is spiritual life. When a person finds themselves disconnected from their spiritual life, when a person is disconnected from Hashem and from Torah, then they are suffering from a spiritual form of death. And that is why the Parah Adumah was brought outside the Beis HaMikdash. It was the only, so to speak, a korban that was called the Chatas, so it was brought outside the Beis HaMikdash, because whereas all of the other korbanos were for those who were inside the Beis HaMikdash, representing those who were pure, representing those who were connected to spiritual life, to Hashem and to the Torah, the Parah Adumah was there to serve those Jews who were outside of all of the camps. Those Jews who were on the outside, who had tumas meis, who had impurity from spiritual death, of being disconnected from Hashem and from Torah, which is the source of spiritual life. So what would the Kohen do? Now, even though the Kohen usually remained within the Beis HaMikdash itself, the Kohen had to preserve his holiness. Nonetheless, the Kohen, to do the Parah Adumah, would have to leave the Beis HaMikdash. They would walk over a specially constructed ramp or a bridge that would go from the Temple Mount to Har HaMishcha. And in doing so, the Kohen would leave the protective spiritual cocoon of the Beis HaMikdash to go to the outside. And over there, they would bring the Parah Adumah. Not only that, our sages teach us that the Parah Adumah, whilst it was metaher es hatmeim, whilst it would bring purity to those who were impure, but it was metame es hatahorim. It would bring a level of impurity to those who were pure. So even though the Kohen was now leaving the Beis HaMikdash and exposing himself to spiritual impurity by bringing by being involved in the Parah Adumah, nonetheless, because the Parah Adumah would be able to reinstate and reconnect a Jew who suffered from spiritual death back to their spiritual connection with Hashem, back to their spiritual connection to Torah, for that reason, the Kohen, being a man of chesed, was prepared to make a personal sacrifice on their own personal spirituality, their own personal holiness and purity, in order to assist another Jew to attain the same level of purity and connection. Now, it says that whilst the Kohen was outside of the Beis HaMikdash when he did this avodah, nonetheless, he would gaze towards the Holy of Holies. And I suggest the following idea. We know that one of the things that the Rebbe very much encouraged and started in our generation was the concept of shlichus, which means that we cannot suffice to block ourselves off in our own environments of holiness. We cannot take care of our own spiritual needs. We have a responsibility to all Jews, even those who are on the outside, even those who seem to be distant. We have the responsibility to go out to them, like the Kohen, who would leave the Beis HaMikdash, in order to help them to rediscover their connection and their spiritual life and their spiritual purity. Nonetheless, we can never forget where we should be. Even when we are on the outside, even when we're out in the world involved in the concept of shlichus, to help those on the outside, we have to remember the source from where we come is from the Beis HaMikdash. That we come from a place of absolute purity, and we have to retain focus so that way we can remain connected, we can remain inspired, and instead of being affected negatively by the external environment outside of that Beis HaMikdash, we remain connected to our source, and therefore we are able to positively affect the environment around us. And the message of the walls that we were discussing this morning is as follows. That when Hashem sees that we, like the Kohen, are prepared to sacrifice our own spirituality, we're prepared to go out and to be involved in bringing purity to Jews who may seem to lack purity, to bring spiritual life of connection to Hashem and to Torah to Jews who seem to have spiritual death in their lives. When we do that, then Hashem lowers all of the barriers. Hashem lowers the walls to make it easy for us to remain connected and make it easy for us to stay inspired. And with that connection and inspiration, we will be able to bring purity to all of those who find themselves at the moment on the outside. And when we do this, Be'ezras Hashem, we will be zoiche to the coming of Mashiach, when, as the Rambam says, we will have the final, the 10th of the Parah Adumah, which will be brought in our history. And that will be the last time it's required, because at that time, Ruach HaTumah Avim in Aretz, death will be removed from the world. Not only physical death in the literal sense, but spiritual death, which is connected to the Yetzer Hara, will be removed from the world. And we should be zeicha, like the Rambam says, Meheiri Yigale, may Mashiach be revealed speedily. Amen, Ken Yiratzon, Amen, may it be his will. Thank you very much for joining and for joining us the entire week. Have a good Shabbos, and please stay tuned. Join us again on Sunday morning for the mid-morning Mikdash moment.
Thank you very much. A good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos. Shabbos. Thank you and your family.
Beautiful message.